like if it's late night, to actually stay back and continue to watch and learn more. And I hope you've been having a great time learning and watching from all the other amazing set of speakers and content that they've had so far. And be sure to tune in on the 22nd and the 29th as well, because there's another set of really great speakers that I know and I'm looking forward to. And so is my screen share showing up okay?
Yes, it is. Crystal clear.
Awesome. Yeah, so today we're going to learn about how you can blend code-first tools like APIM with low-code tools like Power Platform, Power Apps, or Power Automate to accelerate the business apps and their delivery in Microsoft Teams. And the APIM integration with Power Platform has been my most favorite announcement this year. And I really think there's a lot of value for huge organizations or whatever size the organizations be, because it actually does help them unlock access to a diverse set of Microsoft Cloud hosted services or even their existing Azure investments. And it enables citizen developers to benefit from them with just a few clicks with their existing Teams licenses. And that's what we're going to be focusing on today. A little bit about myself. I am a business applications MVP and an intelligent apps dev architect with Artist Consulting, which is a Microsoft partner based out of Dallas, Texas. And I am a power addict and passionate about everything Office 365, Azure, SharePoint. And I frequently try to share my learnings and experiences from the Power Platform ecosystem. So feel free to connect with me on Twitter. And there's my blog post. And I'm also the co-founder of the Dallas Fort Worth Power Apps and Power Automate UG. Here's our agenda for today. So I think this is gonna be pretty light on slides. I'm gonna be focused more on demos and showing you how you can work with APIM, get a better understanding of how you can create custom connectors. So first off, we're gonna talk a little bit about Power Platform and the extensibility with Microsoft Teams, like how Power Apps and Power Automate play a part of it and how custom connectors come into the whole picture. And then we'll talk about the benefits of using APIM and what APIM really is about. And then the last three parts of the agenda is going to be about actually building them from scratch. So we're going to walk through building a blank API, and then we're going to walk through building an APIM connector using an API definition, and also building an API connector from an existing Azure resource. This is going to be, I'm hoping this will cover pro devs and citizen devs who are trying to pick up Fusion devs, in the sense who are, they're wanting to upskill and go above and beyond and extend their skill set. So I'm hoping this would be helpful. And feel free to drop a question or maybe stop me and ask a question. I'm happy to answer. Now, before we get started, I wanted to just do a quick poll, because I want to get a feel for who's there in the audience, like what kind of skill set am I talking to, and just want to make sure that that I fine tune my scope for the session today so that it caters to everybody. So what I want to do is just get a feel for who are code first devs here. So I'm just going to drop in a couple of chat messages, and then if you can do a emoji or just react to it, then that way it'll give me a count of how the kind of skill sets that we have. So let me go ahead and drop them shortly. So what I'm going to do is, so you should see the first one out there, and I'll explain a little bit about what I'm trying to get from you guys. Let's capture the next one. So the intention is for me to if you are a code first dev, go ahead and it. We'll see how many code first devs we have here, in the sense you come from a developer background, and then you are a citizen dev, in the sense you kind of just stay within the low code, the building business apps, and playing around with it, or you're a Fusion dev, and since you're open or you're already part of a Fusion development team, which is hybrid of pro code and low code, or you're trying to, you don't come from a code first background, but you're trying to upskill and become a code coder. Oh, it's pretty good. We've got code first and Fusion devs. That's awesome, and that's pretty cool. I'm just going to give it a few minutes and see where we are with the ratings there. And while we wait on that, I wanted to kind of just talk about this whole ecosystem of how Azure and Power Platform actually work really well together, and they are better together. Power Platform in general helps professional developers to supercharge their app productivity, and it helps them tackle a growing set of work requests with efficiency and ease, just with the type of tool sets that are available today. Now, they can also focus on more complex capabilities through high-value work like building Azure services. It could be APIM, Azure Functions, or maybe you're working with cognitive services. Azure really is the backbone of the entire platform. Everything you see in the Power Platform, be it Power BI, Power Apps, or Power Automate, all of that is hosted and managed in Azure. However, as an end user or an admin, you are not seeing that because it's kind of abstracted from you when it comes to low code. And that's the whole concept, because they want to make it intuitive enough for anyone to jump into the bandwagon of low code and start building solutions. Now, in addition to that, professional developers are also able to use Power Platform to go above and beyond and tap into those existing services or maybe your Azure investments and solve business needs. There is this concept of fusion development wherein you have a code development environment where citizen devs and professional development developers and also any kind of business stakeholders who are a critical part of the business solution all work together. So that's where, and that's something that I'm really passionate about because I see a lot of value, especially in organizations that are going with an API first concept of exposing their services and data via an API layer. And then you have your citizen devs who can tap into it with the help of pro devs who build those wrappers for you. So you can just connect to those wrapped proxies and tap into the data. Now, this whole process of being a Fusion development team actually helps you as a citizen developer to express your business need quickly, because you can start going and building an app and you can work with your professional developer and fill in any gaps that you're not comfortable with, or maybe you don't have the skill set. And then end users continuously provide feedback. And the biggest advantage of this is it's very iterative. Like you have an MVP solution way before in your life cycle, unlike other agile or waterfall models. So this Fusion Teams is definitely something that if you are new to the term, you should check it out. There is a ebook that was recently put out by some community members, and it's been reviewed by a couple of Microsoft folks as well. It actually is it's a team that actually blends technology and domain expertise and to see high value in organizations. And it's really critical to any organization trying to do digital transformation and driving innovation. Now, this image over here is kind of a representation of where the different types of devs fall in place, right? You have every developer who can go build apps, they can build Power Automates, they can work with chatbots or dashboards at the very top layer. And then you have your pro devs who come in and build these services for you. They wrap them up so that you're able to talk to the underlying data or your external data sources. And they use Visual Studio Code or Visual Studio, or they use client-side scripting, and they build that out and they expose that. And now as a citizen that you're able to just consume and tap into those. So this is just a very high-level overview. I'm sure you've seen this imaging everywhere. Now, this is kind of a very holistic view of how Power Platform actually enables low-code development. So you have the users and they use their clients like mobile or web. And then you have the UI and logic layer. So UI is your Power Apps. That's where it comes into play. And then you have Power Automate flows that helps you run through any validation rules or any business logic. And then you have the services and data. That little section over there, connectors, is how you talk to your underlying data sources or your services that you want to interact with or you want to consume data from. So this is more of a representation of how standard connectors work. So this is something we're familiar with, where these are data sources that are that you're able to access for free as part of your Office 365 user licensing. So it comes as part of your seeded licensing. So those are pre-built standard connectors that you already have, that Microsoft's already put out, and there are REST APIs behind those connectors that tap into that make calls and tap into your existing data sources. Now, there is the next level where you have custom connectors. For example, if you have a certain data source or a service that's not covered by a standard connector, then you are trying to access them via a custom connector. That's when you need you have to do more code, where you need a skill set to create an API, or maybe come up with an open API definition that defines the schema of your API and wrap that up in a wrapper, and then you expose that. And now now you have the operations that you can make to make calls and return back your tokens and your data. But the only caveat to there is a premium licensing to it, so it doesn't come with your seeded license. So anytime you connect to, let's say, SQL on-prem or any Azure resources directly from an standalone Power App or Flow, you have to have at least a per app license or a per user license or one of the Flow licenses as well. This next slide here is to show you how things have changed in the last year. So we now have the ability to build custom connectors for free and consume them as long as your apps and flows are within the context of Microsoft Teams. And how that works is for you to build an APIM, which is an API management layer, which is what we're going to be focusing our session today on. So you have your external services or your internal data sources that are considered premium if you're actually going to be accessing it directly from a standalone Power App. But if you're going to be accessing it from Teams, then it really is included as part of your Teams license. So all you need is just a valid Teams license assigned to your account, and you should be able to build and use apps that have custom connectors that tap into an APIM, and the APIM routes your calls to the internal and external services. There's several advantages to using APIM, but this has been my favorite announcement so far, because it enables you. So far, there are smaller businesses and medium-sized businesses that have been kind of tied down with the pricing of things, but this actually it's not just about the cost, it's also about how the integration works, because your day-to-day work is just within Teams. You collaborate with your team, your members, and your at your workplace within Teams. So how cool is it if you don't have to leave the context of Teams and you're just working with apps and flows right within your context, and you're able to tap into all these complex data sources or sophisticated data sources for free, as long as you have an APIM connector exposed as a custom connector. I'm going to go back and just take a quick look at that's really cool that I can see this Code First and Fusion devs. So I'm really happy to see, because that's something I really love, the Fusion teams, because that's where I see there's value, and that is the future of blending Code First and low code. So that's awesome. I will go ahead and start talking about what an APIM really is. So Azure APIM really stands for Azure API Management. It's a very powerful service for your APIs. It's a SaaS solution, in the sense it's a software as a service solution that allows you to easily manage thousands of APIs, control access. You can define subscriptions. There's a lot you can do. You can define policies. What's even better is that this entire service is nearly maintenance free. You set it up once, you make the integration, the mapping for your external services and API that you want to call, and then you're done. You just start consuming it in your underlying client apps and flows. Now, this also allows you to start focusing on the actual feature and functionality rather than having to maintain your APIs. The foundation or the core objects that comprise an APIM are APIs. So each API has a set of operations that are available to developers or even citizen devs who want to consume from it. And then that API has a reference to your backend service. And that's what implements the calls to your backend service. And it knows how to format the data, how to bring it back. All of that is done as part of the API. And all your APIM does is it enables you to have control over that URL mapping, how the path parameters need to be, and how the request and response content need to be, how you can specify policies. So it's a very powerful service within your Azure instance. And so we're going to take a look at how we can add APIs to APIM and then consume that in your low-code tools like Power Apps and Power Automate today, but within the context of Teams. So that's what we're going to be focusing on. And you can see on the right here, there is a visual that shows you the different ways you can actually define a new API. So you can either define a new one, in the sense you start from scratch. It's a blank API. You define how you want the endpoints to work, how those policies need to work, or you have an open API spec, which is a schema, which essentially is a standard for the schema of how your calls calls need to be. So you can import that and start working with it. So if your developer already, if your pro dev team has an API that's existing, all you need to ask for them is just get the open API spec and just import it and start mapping those URLs and just consume the data. The third way to do that is to create from an Azure resource. It could be a logic app, an API hosted app service, or it could also be a function app. Now, from an API definition, I mean, there are a couple of formats that you can use. One is Open API, which we talked about. This is more around language agnostic interfaces to REST APIs. And then you have WADL, which is an XML representation of RESTful APIs. And then WSDL, which is an XML representation of any SOAP APIs that you have. But today we're going to look at Open APIs as an example, for the essence of time. So our first demo, I mean, we're done with slides. Everybody loves demos, right? I usually love it when sessions have lesser slides and there's a lot more demo, and you can learn a lot more when you have practical exposure to it. I'm kind of a visual person, but what we're going to do next is actually build an APIM connector from scratch. Now, let's talk a little bit about why and when would you need to build an APIM connector from scratch. Let's say, for example, you are a citizen dev and you have a pro dev team and you're working in collaboration. We talked about this Fusion dev team. This method of creating a blank API will enable you as a citizen dev to proceed with the implementation and testing of that interface without really needing to have the full API built. So you can have both of the work going in parallel. So you are able to just mock up your API via APIM, just specify how your base URL needs to be, what the response needs to look like, and then you can start using that and start consuming, and you can make progress in your actual implementation of your apps or your flows within the context of teams. But you're at the same time, your pro dev team who have the higher expertise or domain expertise to work with APIs, they can start building those APIs. And finally, when everything comes in, when the different pieces of the puzzles fall into place, you change that mapping and start pointing to the actual API. So this kind of helps you do the code development model seamlessly. So we're going to take a look at that. So what I'm going to do is quickly hop over to my Azure instance over here, and I will do a quick check to see if there are any questions. Okay. All right. So we have, okay, the first question from True Alex. What is the difference between custom connectors and Azure API? So custom connectors are really APIs behind the scenes. I mean, it's just a wrapper. You're abstracted from what's happening behind the scenes. They really are just APIs. Essentially, they are actually Azure APIs. So if you are looking at your custom connector to reach out to Azure SQL, there is a connector, there's a template that's already available. But what that's doing is it's a combination of APIs and Cosmos document DBs that actually work together to define how those calls need to be and what data needs to be sent. So that's actually what custom connector is, just a wrapper for those APIs. And Azure API is a way for you to host APIs. You build APIs. It could be function proxies, or you're building some kind of an orchestration for your solutions. It is just another service as part of your Azure portal that you can use to host your APIs. I hope that was helpful, Pro. Can we add SSO identities to APIM in addition to Azure AD? Yes, you can. I know there are a couple of other, if there's multi-factor authentication or things like that. I mean, there's additional work to do to enable that. By default, it works based on the Azure AD authentication, but you have to add an additional layer. There are ways to do that. Let's see, can we have access to custom connector with Azure API management as part of the Power Platform license, or do we need additional license for it? So yes, so you do have access to a custom connector with Azure APIM without requiring an additional Power Platform license, as long as your apps and flows are within the context of Microsoft Teams. So that is what you have to note there. But you're able to use the same connector. Let's say you have an APIM generated custom connector. You're not restricted from using it from a standalone Power App or a flow. It's just that at that point you have to pay an additional premium license. You have to have a per app license or a per user license to be able to tap into that. But you can, the whole advantage advantage of doing it within Microsoft Teams is that it's just within that interface, and that integration within Microsoft Teams is where Microsoft or the product team has enabled it to be free. We've looked at importing to create a custom connector, and only 2.0 was supported at the time. Azure APIM supports 3.0. How would that translate to over to Power Apps? That has changed right now. So you are able to import OpenAPI 3.0 because I'm going to be using one of that for the demo, and it does work. All right, I think I've answered the questions. All right, let me go back to our portal here. Now, the very first step for you to be able to create an APIM-based connector, or even to create an APIM instance, is for you to make sure that you have an instance. So in my case, I have two created, but you should be able to go ahead and create one if you don't have one. And that takes you through this process of using specifying what subscription, what resource group. Now, if you are new to Azure, there is you're able to sign up for a trial environment. You could also sign up for a developer tenant, and that gives you a free Azure credits for about 12 months, and then you can upgrade and go pay as you go. But one thing you want to remember with APIM is you're not really charged for the actual APIM. It's very minimal cost just for hosting these services, and so it's really good if you want to try and you want to have a sandbox environment for you to play with. And then you choose your region. You have you specify your resource name, what you want your APIM to be named, and then you just provide some contact information for it. The ones that I'm on are on a developer pricing tier, in the sense I don't have to pay, but there is no SLA on it because it's not a production version of an API. It's just more for just demos and just for my learning purposes. So that's always a good place to get started. Now, if you are creating one, keep in mind that it really, the timing of the creation really varies. Like the last time, sometimes it takes about a few minutes, but then the last time it took about nearly 45 minutes for it to set up the whole APIM. So I think the actual automation of setting it up it takes a little bit of time, and it really varies, but don't get alarmed if you see it. All you need to wait for is just keep looking at the status and just set it up and walk away and come back, and in an hour you should have it activated and it's online. So now I have an APIM instance already. So what I'm going to do is look at APIs. So here is where you can go create a new API. You can create a blank API from scratch, or you could create one from a definition or from an Azure resource. Now, if you are new and if this is the first time you're creating APIs, you're not going to see this. Now, these are some test ones that I created, but what you would do and create a new API. Now this in Azure is called blades. You have several blades, and these are the different properties that you have access to. But what you really want to do is just access the API blade and get started with it. Now, what we're going to do is actually go ahead and create a new API. I'm going to call it my blank or my new API. And then we need to provide a URL. So I'm just going to call it the same way. We'll just that'll be our, so that's when you specify the URL, that's how it'll try to suffice, it'll add some test or formulate the URL for you how you want it. I'm going to add a little suffix. I'm going to say I am going to mock data. So let's do that, and you notice that it actually added that as a suffix, and here is my base URL. So if this is how it's going to translate those backend URLs and map them, so you're actually masking the actual calls that are happening behind the scenes. And this is the base URL. This is the call that it's actually going to happen in the front end for you. So I'm going to go ahead and create that. Oops. Let's see. Let me go back and look at, let's hope the demo guards are not that mad at us. Right, let's do this. How about I show you one of them? Always happens when I'm running through a demo, something doesn't work. Yeah, so I'll just go ahead and show you one that I already created, just so that I can, we'll see if we've got a couple more things to cover. So here is one that I already created, just in case something goes wrong. It's always good to have a sample working version. So I created one from blank. And what you do is when you go through the process of filling out the details and you fill it out, you can also choose what those operations need to be. Now I'll show you what the settings that I really picked for these. Now you can see that I created a blank, a display name and a name for it. And then I also did a suffix. Actually, you know what? Let me go ahead and try one more time. Hopefully third time's the charm. Let's see. It didn't like our name. All right, I will say mark data. All right, let's go. I'm not going to give a URL. All right, yep, that's where it was. So what we've done is just create a blank one. It has no mapping, it has nothing. We're just going to create a blank one where we can mark data up. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how you can add an operation. So we talked about how APIs are the foundational objects for APIM, but then underneath there's a hierarchy, like there's APIs, but then each API has to have a set of operations. Like how would your underlying service know how to talk to your backend data sources? So what we're going to do is go ahead and create a display name for it. I am going to just say mark, and then we'll call it mark data. Not going to specify any names over there. You could potentially add any query parameters if you want to, if that's the way you want to communicate with the API, you could do that. You could also pass in headers if you need to. What I'm going to do is just mark my response. So I am going to say, I'm going to pick 200. So I'm going to say just anytime I make a call to this, because what I'm doing as a citizen dev is I want to be able to have a way to mark my calls to the connector and then just start working with the result outputs and start progressing with the implementation. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to mark 200 result. 200 is success. And so we're going to say, let's add the type of data the content type that you would want to add. So I am going to say I want application JSON. So that's how that's going to be. And then I'm going to also type in a sample text. So that's how I'm going to be specifying my actual data. Let's do this. I am going to just say mark text, and I'm just passing in a name value just to make sure that that's how it returns the data. And I'm going to say we made it. So this is our mock data. So you could specify your JSON in any format. It could be a key value pair, it could be an array of key value pairs or properties and objects, but I'm just keeping it simple just to show you with a single value pair. All right, so that's there. Now I'm not going to define the definition, but I'll show you what happens. We'll come back to this in a bit. So now we have that, and then I'm going to go ahead and save it. So let's save that. And then let's go back to the settings. There are a couple of things here that I want to call out. This section over here is something that you really have to have a good understanding of. Subscription is a way for the APIs and the incoming requests and outgoing requests for them to implement security. That's how it manages security internally as soon as your calls hit your APIM gateway. So what this does is if you have this selected, it is going to prompt your users to provide, or anybody who's consuming the API, to provide a subscription key in the header every single time they make a call. Now, if you choose not to do that, then they won't be prompted for it. They'd only be prompted for it when you actually are creating the connection for the first time. You just have to provide a subscription key, and then it knows, this is the additional layer of security that you have to pass and authenticate for it to make the call. So I'm going to uncheck that, but general recommendation, best practice would be to enable that so that you have an additional security layer. So not just anybody who has access to the API doesn't start, consuming data from it. So you would want to do that. But just for the sense of time, I'm going to go ahead and uncheck that. So we'll go and save it. All right, we have that. Now that we have it, let's go and do a quick test. So you do have an option within the blade to actually run a quick test. I don't have any parameters. It's just a blank API with mock text. So I'm going to go ahead and hit send and see. Been hitting a couple of errors. this time around. What is it? It's got an error. Let's go. Let's check what went wrong. I will also make sure that I have a product selected just to be sure, because products are just the way that APIM categorizes APIs. So let me go ahead and see, run a test again. Let's see, here is my mock, and let's go ahead and run. I'm still running an error. All right, I'm going to go back to the one that I created right before our session today, just to have something in place that's working. But I'm going to show you, it's pretty much the same process. I went through the process of creating it, and you'll notice I have a slightly different name, but I've unchecked the subscription. And then if we actually go ahead and hit test, so this actually runs fine. This, I have the sample text. It actually returned back the response. It's just showing me what that response needs to be like. So we'll use this just to save time instead of us troubleshooting that. So we have that, and then this is our endpoint. So now let's try and make a call to this in the in a Power Automate, or maybe even in a Power App. So let's go here. So what I have here is a Teams instance, and I have a Teams channel, and I've already just built a placeholder app. What you would do is for you to be able to create an environment in the first place, because when you publish your APIM connectors, you have to have an environment that you can publish to. So what you need to do is, for that, at least have one app created, and that way it will create an environment in Teams. So every time you create an app, every team has, it's a one-on-one mapping, every team has an environment created for you. And so I already created one, just so it goes through the process of creating an environment. So let's go ahead and open that up. I will go and edit it. And while that's getting ready, I'll show you how you can publish it. Because the other one errored out, I'm just going to show you how. This one's already published, but I'm going to show you how to publish it. So we already have an operation, and we have all the settings in place. And then if you look at the actual design of the operation, we have that. And then there is this definition over here, and I'll talk a little bit about why that's important. I couldn't get to show you because the other one errored out. But I'll show you why it's important to have a definition shortly. But how you would export it is you would just go to the three dots over here on the specific API that you would want, and then hit export. And when you export, you see these options, and the very last one over there is the Power Apps and Power Automate. So this is all you have to do. When you hit that and you export it, it automatically creates a custom connector for you. It drops in the parameters, it drops in the policies, anything that you've defined. It does all of the heavy work. So it really is as simple as just a couple of clicks, and you actually have a test API generated custom connector for you to start playing with. So when you click on that, you'll notice that it actually displays all of the environments that you can pick from. Now, I have, so here is the environment that we have. We have the Power PA bootcamp environment. And then what I'm going to do is go ahead, and you want to make sure that you are picking the team's environment. And that really is based on the name of your teams. So that's the team that I created for the demo. And I'm going to go ahead and export this. So let's just wait for it to export. Yeah, because I already have one. So let's do this. I will go ahead and exit that because it's not letting me do it because I already have one. But I'll show you how it got created in the end. Let's go back to our Power Automate here. And we'll go to custom connectors. And I have a bunch of them created. Now, if you look at this, this is the custom connector that it did create. So I didn't have to go and create anything. It was just that integration from the Azure portal that already drops in a connector for you in that environment that you need to be in. And so you're able to actually use it. So now let's go and see if we can use it. So I'll open up the definition for you a little bit just to show you how it actually works. So you have your your actual definition of just general information, and then you have your security, because in general it is going to use that subscription key behind the scenes. Once you define it for that connection, then it'll start using that to communicate. And then you have your definition section, which has the mock operation that we already defined, and we don't have any parameters defined here, so this is just showing you what the URL looks like, and we don't have any policies as well. So policies are a way for you to have control over how things behave, or how the triggers work. You can also define policies within your definition. So I'm going to show you quickly how that can be done. Let's go ahead and cancel this out. Yep, I've noticed that sometimes APIM takes a little bit to load things, so you might want to just click away and come back, and that'll give you more. That'll bring it back up of how you want it to be. But here we have an inbound processing policy. What policies allow you to do is actually modify things that you would want, when it's inbound request or whether it's going outbound. Now, in this case, what I am doing is actually telling the inbound request that, hey, this is going to be a mock response, so you don't need to make a call to the backend. Just push back whatever I have defined as the sample response. We defined the sample response with mock text saying we made it. So that's what I'm doing here, and I'm going to show you how that looks like. So this, you would just go to your inbound processing policies, and you can pick a mock response option, and you're able to specify what that response needs to be like. So this was the result, a response outcome that we picked, and so that's what we're using here. Let's go back and show you how you can actually do that. You can go to add policies. And then here are the different types of policies that you have that you could potentially use. We've already dropped in the mock response policy in it, but there are the different ways that you could use to set query parameters, maybe even allow cross-origin sharing. And it's a really powerful set of policies that you can set. This is not just for inbound, but for outbound as well. So let's go back to our settings here. So hopefully this did get, while we wait for it, let's go here, and I'm going to go ahead and just drop in a text in the app. So just waiting for this app to load. So let's go ahead and just drop a text box here, and then I'm going to drop in a button as well, because I'm going to use that APIM call. So let's go over here, and let's call this this is going to be our new API call, and then we're going to add a data source. So I will go ahead, and for that, our connector is really our data source. And then what I had it called was, so yeah, that's the one. So I am going to say, go ahead and import that. I can see that my Teams is getting a little glitchy, not sure what it's doing, but I'm going to go ahead and add that. And now I should be able to tap into that API. What I'm going to do is say set, and then I'm going to say, going to just define a variable. I'm going to say my API object, because we want to store that so we can actually use that as part of the rest of the implementation. So we'll go as simple as just defining, this is a global variable I'm defining, but just for demo purposes, but you could totally do an update context to have a more local cache of the content. And then let's go look at my API mock. That's the endpoint that we defined. And then we are just going to call that. Oh, I dropped it in the wrong place. This is not the property. I think with the glitch, it reverted back to the property that I didn't want to be working on. Let's go ahead and select on select. That's where we want it to be. Now that we have that, now let's go ahead and just do a preview, and I'm going to just hit that, and you can see that it's actually trying to make that call. And then let's go over here and let's open this up, and now you can see that this actually just has true. It's not really returning back the text. That's because that version of the connector that I had really didn't have the definition defined. The way it works is Power Apps really needs a schema or a way for you to define how that output needs to be, whereas in Flow you're able to see the raw output. So let's go back to Flow, and I'll show you what the difference is. So let's go over here. and I will go and show you in this one. So we've got a flow created that's actually tapping into that specific API over here. So I already have that custom connector dropped. And if you actually go to the compose, you'll notice that as part of this is the revised version of the connector. So I'm going to show you where that definition comes into play. So within Flow, like how if you get the raw JSON, it's not going to be that helpful because you'll still have to parse through it. What you really want is those objects or properties to be exposed so you can actually reuse it as part of your flow. And so for that, you have to have a definition defined within your APIM. So we have the object and the body, and now I can just choose to say, I just want to see what the value is for that mock text property that I had defined as part of my sample request. So let's go back to the APIM, and then I'll show you where you can do that. So I pointed out that definition over here. So I am going to click on the definition, and you can see that this actually has that schema defined. It's very easy to do that. You can actually use your sample request and drop that as an example, and it will generate the schema for you. It does that work for you already. And so now that we have this, it knows that these are the properties that it really needs to expose as part of Flow or even as part of PowerApp. So now within Flow, you notice that it did already expose that because we have that definition defined. So these are just things that you want to remember when you start working with APIs and when you start working with APIM to mask those URLs and start generating custom connectors. So what I'm going to do is just quickly run this test over here, and let's run this flow, and we should notice that it actually runs fine, and it should show us the output. So this actually does bring back the output because I am just capturing the value of that specific property. So that's how you can actually create a blank API, define a sample request that you want to define, and then you're able to use it. These are the steps that we actually did. You go ahead and create them, and I'm sorry it errored out. I'm not sure what's going on with that, but I'm glad that I had a working version. But you create a test API, and then you add an operation to it, and then you specify your inbound policy to mark them because you want to just have your own JSON output that you want to retrieve, and then use that in your implementation. And then you can add a definition for the schema so that it exposes the specific properties that you want. And then we talked about how subscription keys are important for securing it. Now, when I ran this flow, it didn't ask me for a subscription key because we unchecked that option. But the very first time you drop in an API, you've exposed it as a connector and you're dropping in to use it, you will notice that you are prompted to define the connection name and then provide the subscription key, because it's a one-time thing. Once you do that, then it will start making those calls using that security layer. But for best practices in real-time scenarios, you would want to have that enabled, and you would want your users to specify the subscription key. So that way, your citizen devs will have to work with your pro dev teams to know what the subscription keys are. Or you could also go capture it from the APIM, and I'll show you where you can do that. And then so we looked at how you could start from scratch, and you can do that. So next we're going to look at how you can actually build a open APIM connector from an open API spec. So this is open API is just a standard for defining how your APIs need to be. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a use case where, for example, let's say you have an existing API and you either get the open API spec from the product team, or let's say you are the product and you want to generate one and start using it to create it. So we're going to take a look at how you can do that. So let's get back to our demo here. I'm going to go back to my open API here, and I know we have about 15 minutes. I'm going to, instead of creating from scratch, I'm going to show you how you can use one that's already existing. So I will use my hub users. So I have that. And so I went through the same process of going through adding an API, and then I picked an open API. Now, when you choose this option, you're able to define the same properties, like what the display name needs to be, how you want your name for the suffix needs to be, and how you want the URL to be formatted. But then you have this option here to either point to a URL that hosts your open API specification, or you could select a file. Now, for demo purposes, what I did, I often go to the rec rest inside to use this fake APIs. So if you actually look at this, you will have a bunch of fake APIs with get and posts and different types of operations that you can use. So we're going to use this simple sample over here to generate the open API spec. So let's look at how, let's say you know what the response looks like, but now you want, and you have the API endpoint. Now what you want to do is just be able to create that open API spec. So here I have that. I'm just hitting that endpoint just to show you what that raw JSON output looks like. So I'm basically just paging through the collection of data, and then I'm pulling in the the list of names and their cities and things like that. So let's go back to Swagger. So what I'm using here is the Swagger Inspector. Swagger is an open source tool that you can use to work with API definitions, and it's actually is a very important part of any. If you're a pro dev and you are familiar with working with APIs, you would know that this is an important step in the process where you are defining those open API specs, and you are defining it. And it's also kind of like a documentation for you to know what are the endpoints available, what parameters available, and how you can make those calls. So I have this generated where I have my endpoint called, and you can see that it actually did generate the response. You can have a login, but if you want to just to test with the inspector, just to see what the parameters are sent, you don't need to log in. But then if you want to create an API definition file, you have to have a sign in. You can either sign in with your GitHub account, or you could create a new one. And so you could pick one of your historical calls, and then you could choose to say create an API definition. So here is where what we've done. So what we've done here is actually picked the Open API Spec 3.0, and when you do that, it opens up another tab for you, which is called the Swagger Hub. This is what helps you define. It generates that Open API spec for you. So what you're looking here, what we're seeing here is the actual Open API spec. You can see this is the 3.0 version, and then you have the information, the title element. It dropped in a bunch of default metadata, but you're free to go and update it as needed. And then, but what's important to note here is the actual endpoint. So this is the endpoint, the base URL that it's using, and then you have your paths. And this is the specific paths that we're actually going to be using. And one more update that we have here is the parameter. We have a query string parameter that is of string value, and we're passing in a parameter of name page. So it actually does have all of that defined for you. It generated all of this for you. You didn't have to go and create it. But this is a great tool if you, and I have a couple of resources links that points you to these resources too. So I'll drop them in the chat for you to use. But what this does is it generates a intuitive UI for you to play around with and test. So this actually tells me this is a get operation, and this is a user's endpoint, and I'm trying to get a list of users. So I can try it out. So I can say I want to try it out, and I'm passing in two. I just want to get it's a paged set of data. I'm going to get whatever's in the second page, and when I do that, you'll notice that it has a response code, and then this is the body. You can see it's got a couple of fake data with emails and first name and last names and some URLs to pictures. So this is the working API that I just used, which has some fake data. But what we've done here is generated that open API. Now you can export this and download it. So I've downloaded as a JSON resolved API spec. And let's go back to our API. This is where you would go and select that file. So it's as easy as just using these two sources. You just have to have that endpoint. And if you actually know how the format of the data is, you can use a combination of Inspector and the Swagger Hub to generate your Open API definitions if you have to create one from scratch. So you would select that. Now I've already gone through that process. So let's go back and go look at this test APIM here. So we've got our get API users action, and you'll notice that we have defined what that front end needs to look like. And the one difference here, I mean, we talked about definitions and how that works, because that's what enables your APIs to expose those properties and objects for easy consumption within an app or a flow. So we're going to go ahead and edit this so I can show you how the parameters are sent. So you'll notice that here we have a new parameter defined, because that is a query string parameter, and it's of type string, and that's what we're sending. So this is how you would tell your Flow or Power App to expect an instance of the query string parameter to be sent. So that is all this is all you had to do to define it. But then when you export this, going through the same process of exporting, you would go and just hit export, and that will let you export a PowerApp, and you'd pick Power Apps and Power Automate, and you would pick your team's environment, and it would export it, and it will form the connector for you. And at that point, it already has that API spec definition, so it knows how to drop in those operations and parameters and any policies that you've defined. So let's go back to our Power Automate here. I will go ahead and show you one that I've already created. So here is my sample Power Automate. I am going to go ahead and open that, and you'll notice that I am making a call. So the first time I created that, it does ask me for a subscription key. Actually, I did want to show you where to get the subscription key before we jump off to that. Let's show you where. So if you go to your APIM instance, there in the blade for the properties, you will see an option for subscriptions. And in the subscription, you'll notice that it's kind of scoped it by product and service. That's how APIM works. It actually categorizes your APIs as products. And so we're just using the out-of-the-box ones, a starter and unlimited. So if you actually go and try and view them, you can actually see the primary key and secondary key. And that is your subscription key that you want to provide to your connector, so it knows that this is an authenticated request that needs to happen, and that's the key it needs to use to talk back to the API, and then in turn your backend. So now let's go ahead and do this. I will go ahead and run that flow quickly. So I already have my parameters set to be yes, and let's go and test that out so you can see what it actually does. It will return back the test data that I want to use. And it actually did pull back all of the objects and properties because we defined the schema definition, so it actually exposes them as individual properties, and the data section is what really has the core data that we need as sample data. So this actually has my response, and now I can actually use this object to either fill in a gallery within a Power App, or maybe I can parse and manipulate and format this data in a format that I want and use it in flow and consecutive actions that I need to be. So that was an example of how you can use an open API spec. The last example I wanted to walk you through is just creating an APIM-based custom connector using an Azure function. So just for the purpose of keeping it simple, I don't have anything complex going on. It's just a PowerShell-based Azure function that is pretty much just looking at a parameter in the body or the query string, and then it will just spit back a text that would just say that it was triggered and executed successfully. Now there are several scenarios where you would be wanting to use Azure functions. There are examples of wanting to do some kind of complex mathematical calculations, or you're merging PDFs, or you're doing some kind of batching requests, or maybe it's an Azure function that actually helps you to connect to any of your legacy systems as well. So you're not limited to what you can do with the integration with Azure, and that too for free, within the context of Teams, as long as your apps and flows are within the context of Teams. So it's a really powerful feature set that's been enabled, and would highly recommend for everybody to try and tap into it and get a better understanding of how you can actually manage to use that. All right, so now this is a simple partial script. We've got that. Now let's go and see how you would create one. So I'm going to go back to APIs, and then you would go and, when you create, you have an option to pick a function API. I'm just going to show you how that works. I already have one created. We'll walk through that. But this is how you would pretty much ask for a similar set of metadata for you to fill out. But you can go browse for a specific set of function apps that you've enabled in your subscription. So for this, in this specific subscription, I have like about 2 function apps, and this is my specific function app. So you would select that, and then it will tie in and make that integration for you. So let's go back. Since I already have one created, I am going to show you how that works. So here is my APIM, and I have 2 operations here defined. There's a get operation, and then there's a post operation. So I'll just show you how the post operation works. So not a lot has been done here. The only thing we have here is we have a parameter defined. I'm going to go back and go to my definition. Yep. So let's go to our query here. Because we want to specify, it could either be in the query string or it could either be in the body, but I've defined it as a query string, and I'm actually specifying that it's a string. And you do want to call it required if you want that to show up as a required property in the custom connector, because then it kind of is optional. And also you can also change that setting if you want within your custom connector, where you could go in and open up the properties for the parameters, and then you can choose to say if you want it to show up in the advanced settings, or do you always want to show it, or is it not necessary to show? In my case, I want to show it, so I'm just going to go ahead and say it's a required parameter. So it will also run through validations rules. If you don't have it specified, then it'll error out and not let you execute the flow or the call within the app. Then I'm just specifying it as a query parameter. So we're just going to go ahead and run through this test. I'm going to go, and I've exported it just like how you would for every other function APIM connector that we looked at in the past two examples. So let's go back to our flows. And I will go ahead to show you, this is my specific flow. And let's open that up. And now I have my custom connector already dropped. And you notice that it actually prompts me no, not this one. Sorry, let's go back to the, I was going to show you this one here. This is our function app. And this is our post call that we're making. And then you'll notice that this is actually defined to show me a property to capture user input from. So I am just going to go ahead and drop in a name over here. Let's say we're going to say PowerApp-ilicious. That's the name I'm going to pass, and I will save it. And this already has everything defined as part of the connector. So let's go and let's go ahead and test this out. Let's run it. We'll give it a second here, and once it runs, it should return our response. Yep, so it did run, and you can see that it actually outputs some raw data for us. And you'll notice that that is the body. That's how we define the function. If there is a query parameter, then it picks it up and just defines, and this tells us that this function app actually did work successfully. And now you can go through the process of defining policies and schemas to expose those properties and work with it. But this was just a quick example of how you can work with a blank API, how you can work with an open API spec, and also with an Azure function as an existing resource. I know it might be a lot, like a firehose of information that you're getting, but I would highly recommend that you get started with a developer tenant or sign up for some trial Azure credits if you don't have one, or with the organization, and try and start playing around with it. It's really intuitive and for you to get started and implementing these APIM custom connectors within your Microsoft Teams. So back to our slide here. So this is what we looked at. We looked at how you can work with function apps. And there's one thing that I wanted to, before I move on, let me show you. There's a concept of with function apps, security works a little bit different. I missed showing you that. So let's go back to our app here. I'm going to go to my function app. So when you export your function app as a connector, it actually does specify, it actually creates a host key. It's kind of like a key within your function app and it calls it with a name. It has a prefix with APIM, and it also generates a name value pair inside your Azure APIM management instance as well. This kind of contains the host key. This is how function apps know how to authenticate and authorize the whole process of going through tokens and the security layer between APIM and API. So this is something that's already generated for you. But what you want to remember is if you're rotating host keys and let's say you're resetting things, then you want to make sure that you change them in the APIM. So let's go to show you quickly where this is. Yeah, so this is what I did not create it. As soon as I exported one, it generated one and dropped it. So this is telling this function app that, hey, this is the key. If you see a call from this key, then that means you are okay to start communicating. And then let's go back to our actual function app here. And then And you look at the named values, and then you'll notice that this has the same key specified here as well. So it does that work for you already. It knows how to make that connection, but you want to keep in mind when you use that you actually go and change at this spot if you rotated it in the actual function app. So that's what I had for today, and I hope this was helpful. And we looked at how you could work through the 3 different types of creating APIs, and here are a bunch of resources that the Swagger, and then I have a link to the actual ebook for Fusion Dev, and also for the Power Apps API management that you can use. There's a tutorial on how you can start using by creating APIM based connectors as well. So there's a bunch of resources there. And then finally, Bob, thanks a lot for your time, for spending a Saturday evening with me. And this is the last session. So I am very excited and feel very humble for being for you guys to be able to join me and learn so much from all of these different functions and feature sets that we have. So thank you again. And thanks to Raz and all the organizers as well for this excellent opportunity for me to be able to share what I've been learning so far.
Well, thank you, Geetha, for helping the community to take the citizen platform, the citizen development platform, to an enterprise solution with the API management. That's what you've done here, right? You've enabled these applications and these low-code solutions to be consumed by enterprise. So that really does plug a huge gap when it comes to enterprise implementation. So thank you so much for helping the community with that. And there seems to be quite a lot of questions, and I don't think we've got time to answer all of them.
I was looking at it. I can take a quick stab. I know probably in a minute or two, if that's okay.
Okay, great. So Geetha's going to basically answer them in the chat, so that's fine. So thanks again, Geetha.
Sure.
I did notice one of the questions by Davey in relation to Power Automate and API management. Just a quick note to Davey on that one. So there are access policies and API management that Geetha did show, which you can use to control the requests. But there's also a new feature in update in Wave April update for Power Automate, which also allows you to restrict the domains and the triggers for the HTTP request. So definitely check it out. But again, thank you, Geetha, for everything. So that's the last session. Geetha, do you have any final? I know you're doing lots with the community. Do you have any final comments or announcements to make for the community?
Sure. Yeah, I think we have our Power Addicts meetup like every month. So we try to, encourage all of those upcoming and, brilliant community members who have awesome things to showcase. So if any of you are interested, reach out to me. We'd be happy to host you. And then we have Build coming out. So I hear there are a bunch of new Power Platform announcements that we should be awaiting. So be sure to sign up on that one as well. And then I'll also drop in a link for another community-based Power Platform sample GitHub repository. If you have any samples, or if you have suggestions or ideas for new samples that you would want, it's kind of like a one-stop shop for any Power Platform sample that you would want to go. It's community driven. It's run by the community for the community. So that's another thing that I would love to see more samples and see if we can collaborate as a community together.
Thank you, Geetha. So that was Geetha. So Geetha will answer your questions in the chat there. So